Streaming services are on the rise, and brick-and-mortar video stores are a thing of the past. We have lost that experience of wandering the aisles and stumbling upon a film we've never heard of. We have replaced the familiar face behind the video store counter with an algorithm to recommend films. With more and more content available, it's harder to know what's worth watching and what might be a waste of your time. There are many hidden gems out there waiting to be discovered, and we want to help you find them. This is Trailer Rewind, a podcast where we discuss and review recently forgotten or overlooked films that are now available to stream at home. This month on Trailer Rewind, we are looking at a film and its remake. In today's episode, we are going to discuss 2014's The Kindergarten Teacher from Israeli filmmaker Nadav Lapid.
הגר מספיק יפה. די לי. על ביתה יורד גסם מזהב. סמס אלוהים ממש.
יואב, הילד הוא משורר. אתה שומע את הכוח של המילים? את העוצמה של האהבה? כותב המון על אהבה מוחמצת. אפשר לחשוב שהוא איזה רווקה בת 40. כמו ששירים צצים ממנו עכשיו, יש לי שיר, ככה גם הכל יכול לדמום. החצר מגובה של חתולת רחוב. תחשוב על זה? אם זה היה תלוי בי, אני כבר עכשיו הייתי מנסה לעניין מוציא לאור. המשחק, הנעל, הכדור, שמש. אלימות.
Today is April 15th, and The Kindergarten Teacher is on Canopy and Vudu, free with ads. Now, JJ, which one did you access that? Were you a Canopy person, or are you a Vudu, free with the commercial interruptions type of person?
I'm a Vudu person in general, and I felt like the commercial interruptions were helpful for me here, too, with the subtitles and, whatnot. I thought it actually worked for me well. It is key to mention that the other version that we're going to talk about on a later show is available on Netflix.
Yes.
So we should make sure that if we're going to look for the original, this 2014 Israeli version, that you want to do either of those two that you mentioned, Canopy or Vudu, or just purchase it on a different place. But it's streaming on both those places now. How about you? What did you watch Canopy?
I'm a Canopy person. My public library has got me access to all of that stuff. But I will say I have seen some things on the Vudu free with ads. And what I do appreciate is that, at least in the ones that I most recently recall watching, the commercial breaks are sometimes in strange places, but when it comes back, it's like they roll back about like maybe 5 to 7 seconds. So it's not like it's cut and then they throw the commercial and you resume. It takes it back so you sort of get back into the flow of wherever that break occurred.
And I think that helps immensely. I think the other thing that I would say, the only annoying part about it is that it's always the same 2 or 3 ads. So every break is the same 2 or 3 ads. I saw the Tina Fey Mayhem Allstate commercial, I think over the course of the last week, probably like 75 times. But with this film alone, probably like 20, but still. No, it's not that much, but still. So that's the only, but yeah, the way it's set up is, it's a good setup for it. And it says this is a great movie to get for free. With ads on Vudu.
So, this version of The Kindergarten Teacher was released into 2 U.S. theaters. So we're continuing our trend of single-digit theatrical releases. This was 2 U.S. theaters on July 31st, 2015, and it hung around in various theaters until the end of the year. So the numbers sort of fluctuated all over, but it seemed to be in theaters somewhere all the way through the end of 2015. What's interesting is the year before, back in 2014, it was released in France, played on 51 screens over 4 days. So at first I thought, this is like a film festival, 4 days. But I thought 51 screens, that's not just a film festival. That's like...
No, that's a release.
It's a wide release, but for 4 days.
Yeah.
So then it hit the U.S. on iTunes and Blu-ray simultaneously on December 8th, 2015. So again, this with a foreign release like this, but as I was thinking back on this sort of trailer rewind we've done this year, we've had like a foreign film in each pairing that we did, because we had Aniara was foreign, Wild Rose it's English language, it's still a foreign film, outside the U.S. So I thought, we've done a nice job of always balancing some things out with a foreign release. But it does bring challenges to availability of when it was in theaters. But for me, that's, again, the reason we do this. This is something that you may stumble across on Canopy, or as you're scrolling through Vudu looking for what's free, come across this and wondering, is this worth my time? Is this a film for me? Should I spend my 2 hours watching this foreign film? What's going to make me read subtitles, which, as we've heard, is sometimes an issue and challenge for American audiences. So,
Yeah.
what?
Well, and these are great. These are great options
Yes.
for if you're looking for something and you haven't heard of it before.
So with this one, I want to talk about what type of film is this? Is this a character study? Is it an allegory? Is it a tragedy? How would you sort of categorize the overall like genre or atmospheric feeling of this film?
Well, I think it could be any one of those things. For me, watching it, it became a bit of a tragedy. I think I was really on the surface level of what was happening here. It really gave me the feeling of kind of the feeling that we had when we watched something like Faults in the past,
Okay.
where it starts with a simple sort of situation, and by simple I mean something that's understandable, and it goes into an emotional place that you are not necessarily comfortable with, and you have to reconcile what you want to do with the uncomfortability and the negative emotions. So I see it as a tragedy. That being said, I could easily say that because of the subject matter and because of the way that it is presented, the artful way that it's presented, it could definitely be an allegory. It could definitely be pointing at additional things that I wasn't really thinking deeply into the story. I was so affected by things emotionally in this movie that I just kind of dealt with that surface level tragedy that we experienced.
Well, and I think Faults is a good comparison to this one because it's a film that's grounded in reality with realistic characters. I mean, a kindergarten teacher, a student. These are all things that are familiar to
Very approachable.
Yes, familiar and approachable. I wondered if part of this sort of like allegorical feeling, like there's something maybe larger being spoken. I wasn't sure if that was partially attributable to a cultural gap of American culture versus the culture in Israel. Of you've got a foreign language, you've got foreign culture, and it's just, is this a structure that is, there's some barriers there because of either if there's references to things that are cultural touchstones there. You know, whenever you're talking about the arts, what is that role in that culture? Are these pieces that are more familiar there? I don't know if that's the piece, but it did sort of lend itself to that of it might be speaking to larger issues, but not explicitly and directly. So that was,
and that's where it's a piece of art. You can look at this and go that direction.
Yes.
And I assume that some people will. But for me, again, that sort of surface level emotion was so tangible that I wasn't thinking that deeply about it because I was so focused on experiencing the emotions as I watched the film. And they are tragic. We should say that too, that it is negative, uncomfortable types of things that they're pressing you on as you watch this film.
Well, I think you even get that sense from the trailer as I recall, and I think I picked one of us on a Saturday matinee had picked the 2018 one that we'll be talking about later. Sure. As a trailer pick. So I'd gone back to watch this trailer when I found out that it was the 2018 American version was a remake. I thought, oh, well, what is the original? And there is this darkness that you get even in the trailer of this woman's making some decisions that, okay, there's something not quite right here. And how dark is this going to get? Is, anything with small children is tough for me sometimes because I'm like, okay, is this child going to be put in jeopardy? Is there this child in danger? And that's always going to cause an extreme amount, as a parent, it's going to always create some anxiety and stress there of like, no, don't do anything to harm this child. What's going on? And so there is sort of tones of that throughout in terms of what's going on, what's her intentions, what's going on. And so it does get into that darker, more tragic aspect.
I had seen the trailer as well, and I remember thinking, I probably shouldn't see that movie. But then, and then when you suggested it, I had completely forgot about it, leading up to this. And then I in looking at what we're going to watch, I'm a huge Maggie Gyllenhaal fan. She's in the 2018 version. So I was like, oh, yeah, this. And I still didn't remember it. And then I went to it and I was like, oh, it's that movie. And I hadn't realized that it had this sort of origin in this Israeli movie. And so, I watched them in this order too. I watched the Israeli movie first. So I think it set me up for a better understanding of the tragic art that they're really trying to put forward in the movie here.
Yeah. So I think overall, I mean, this is one that you can just read straight. I mean, if there's allegorical pieces that, again, you can play that game of trying to pull out, is there some deeper meaning to this? But I don't think it requires or demands that of the audience. If you just want to approach this as, here's the story of this teacher and this student and this arc of this sort of dark journey that occurs over this, you can totally interact with the film on that level. And I don't think you need to have the mindset that I tend to, I think more because of my background as a English major, of like, let me parse out the themes and motifs and what is there some larger meaning or theme to this that the filmmaker is trying to present. I'm always going to sort of lean into that a little bit more, even if it's not overtly clear what it is. And for me, it wasn't. I couldn't draw a clear conclusion of, oh, this is a commentary on this. I have a few ideas, but it wasn't anything where I said, oh, clearly this is what this filmmaker is trying to say. And as I did some research, I found that there were, several articles and reviews that said, similar things of, it feels like there may be something trying to be said here, but it's not clear. And it's perhaps up to the audience to figure that out for themselves.
A great piece of art. That's what art's supposed to be.
Exactly. So as a great piece of art, how did this, how did you end up ranking this? So, we've got a sense of the type of film it is. And as you said, it wasn't something, as your initial reaction to the trailer was, oh, this isn't for me. But now getting into sort of your ranking and rating this, how'd you end up feeling about this one? Where did it fall?
It's in the top half for me. It's a 97 out of 232. And I think I'm excited to talk about it because I think there's a lot to be said about this as a piece of art, and thinking about it for film buffs in particular. If you like how movies handle tragedy or handle uncomfortable subjects, I think this is a really interesting piece. So at 97 out of 232 for me, it comes in between two other Trailer Rewind movies, actually. So it's just above Experimenter, which I think is a lot of interesting art about a unique thing. But I liked Kindergarten Teacher better than that. And then just below Felony, where Felony is so straightforward in the way that it approached how it was trying to make you feel, where this one is a little bit of a gray area, not in a bad way, both positives for me, but I put The Kindergarten Teacher right in between Felony and Experimenter at 97 of 232.
Okay.
How about you?
This one is, I'll get in as we discuss it in more detail, be able to maybe clarify some of this or explain why, but it ended up really, really high for me. But it did, it did end up near another trailer Rewind film. So for me, it's at 54, which puts it just above The Congress, which is another, crazy film. What's it saying? It's not always clear, but clearly a great piece of art.
I don't think the Congress would be upset with you calling it crazy.
No.
I think that would be, it would wear that crazy as a badge of honor. But yes, I agree.
And then it was just below Hell or High Water, which was that great
yes.
Jeff Bridges, Chris Pine, Ben Foster. Yeah,
Ben Foster.
Yes. So it's right up there. For me, this was like a solid 4 stars for me on this one. Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm a 4-star too. I was somewhere between 3.5 and 4. Yeah, so I'm right in the same area for this one in terms of rating, and definitely a like for me.
So over on Letterboxd, it has a weighted average review of 3.41. So sort of right
lower than us.
Yeah, but probably right in that range. 750 reviews. So previous films we've talked about thousands of reviews. This one only 750 on Letterboxd. Over at Flickchart, 9 people have ranked it over there. So not a film that is being viewed by the Flickchart community. I think that one may skew a little bit more towards your big tentpole films.
Blockbusters, yeah.
And again, this is one that I think may not have shown up on a lot of people's radar because it just didn't have that distribution, and wasn't one that I think I wouldn't have been aware of this film if it hadn't been for the remake. So it doesn't surprise me. I mean, clearly when Letterboxd only has 750 reviews, it's not a film that's been widely seen.
Well, and you only had 4 days to see it in France in 51 different theaters.
That's right.
If you weren't in, Paris at the right time, you wouldn't have been able to catch it.
Right. So, well, listeners, based on our sort of reviews, our ratings here, and what we've said about this, if you think this is the kind of film you want to explore on your own and don't want anything spoiled, this is your chance to pause the podcast and go check out The Kindergarten Teacher on Canopy or free with ads on Vudu. Okay. So, JJ, before we delve deep into the story on this one, I think we really need to talk about the cinematography and camera work in this film because
it's amazing. It's so good.
Okay.
It's so good. It's so interesting. It's so, we've talked a lot on the film board a little bit about pet peeves with camera placement, for example. And this one takes so many different perspectives. It's almost as if when I was watching this, I was like, I want to make movies in Israel so I can work with no rules too. I mean, like but it never felt the interesting thing about this and walking that line. And the reason why I bring up the pet peeves on the film board is because the interesting part about it is that a lot of times that would annoy me, or that would annoy some people in watching it. They're like, well, who's watching from that angle or whatever, but every time in this film, it's done in such an interesting and artful way. And the motion control stuff and like everything, every movement that was controlled and set for, it felt like it was there for a reason. And we talked about in the intro here that the reasons might not be readily apparent, but it felt artful. Everything about it felt sort of curated, and I really liked that. I was super happy about the camera the whole way through the movie.
So what makes it work for you? For the camera, I mean, I'm right there with you. I love the look of this film, the way the camera is placed, where the movement to it. But this is sort of your domain a little bit. Why does it work here? Where other times you might say that it doesn't work, or you're just placing the camera there because you know it's going to look cool and it's clearly not appropriate there, but it creates a cool look that doesn't fit in. How does this integrate with the story, or why does it work? Is it just because we haven't seen it before? I mean, what?
Well, I don't have a technical answer in this case.
Okay,
for this particular movie, but I have kind of like a symbolically poetic reason for it. And I feel like it's like a song in the way that each setup of shots were put together in a way of phrasing that made it work in the ultimate meaning of what it was trying to tell you. So as the camera would drift, or as we would get a locked pan that would go around on a tripod in a room. So it's not a pan with a direct movement from left to right. It's actually locked on a single point, and it pans around a room. And it doesn't follow someone, but it will, at the end of its movement from left to right, it'll pick up someone, and then it will move with the person after that. So that's what I mean about like phrasing in the camera. You don't have art for art's sake, and you don't necessarily understand the technical reasons. I would say, from my standpoint, I didn't care to try and project something on it. I just really enjoyed the way that the song, the phrasing of the camera work was put together, in that we had this sort of purposeful movement when it happened, and it actually picked up the story in a visual way. And I would say that it's indicative of this version in a much greater sense too, in that they aren't necessarily spoon-feeding the audience anything. There isn't necessarily everything in the dialogue. There isn't exposition. There is just this piece of art that's set up there for you to take it in and see how you feel about it. And the camera, in a visual way, the camera was part of that here, and I thought it was really special. I liked all of the creative stuff they did with the camera in this movie.
Well, it's something that, for me, early on, my attention was focused on where the camera is, because our very first shot is like over the shoulder of this man watching TV, and he's adjusting himself on the couch. Yeah. His elbow like bumps the camera like bangs into it. And I thought, you left that in? Is this like a super low budget film and you only had this one take of this one shot?
I thought that too. I thought that too. The first time I was like, oh, it's just an error. Oh.
But then there's so many other shots where it's, for me, it seems like so much like on our main character Nira, like on her shoulder, like right next to her face. It's like the camera's just peeking over her shoulder, and we're right there with her. It's not her point of view, but we're right next to her, alongside of her.
And that's a key difference, right?
Yeah.
So the scene that you're bringing up, it is her perspective. He's jostling her.
Right.
And she is the camera as it's getting bumped. But that isn't consistent through the film. There's many times where we have a third-person perspective, as you mentioned, over her shoulder, or that we are, it's not really the sort of capital E, eye of God setup, but it is in a place that's showing us something happening that we don't have a surrogate on screen to place in that role. I think the movie isn't consistent with it, but it's done, again, that's why I kind of bring up the idea of phrasing. It's done with purpose every time, and you never feel like you're doing it for no reason. The shot that we always talk about in the film board that annoys us with this is from Child 44, where the director placed the camera in the forest to see things that were happening. And it's just like, it immediately gave us all the feeling of like, wait, who's in the forest? And then never connected anything with that shot. It didn't have anything to do with the scene, anything like that. That doesn't happen in this movie. We see things, but immediately we just understand in a very sort of subtle way, we understand some sense of purpose to what we're looking at. And I think that's the art of this. It's not easy. It's a balance that you have to find. And it also is potentially a statement about poetry as well, which we'll get into too when we start talking about the subject matter here.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's from the actually like banging into the camera at the beginning. The other one that to me was that I had not seen before, not done in quite this way, was it's a very short shot of like Nira. It's like after work, whatever. She's out like for a walk or a jog because she's in like sportswear, and the camera's looking at her coming towards the camera down the sidewalk. And as she gets to where the camera is, it pans over to I think, oh, she's just gonna pass by, but then the camera gets to her and then moves along with her and sort of like almost comes alongside of her, almost like we're a disembodied spirit that's like waiting for her to come to us, and then we're going to walk alongside her. And I thought, okay, this wasn't just, oh, she's walking. The camera's like intruding into her space. And there's this scene near the end where the little boy Yoav is in the ocean, and he's got his poem and he starts reciting, and one of his habits that we'll talk about is this pacing that he does. And we've seen him do it several times before, but this time the camera's there, and as he comes to the camera, I mean, he is walking right up to the camera. I mean, he is way up in it, and then he turns and walks away.
The shot is not framed.
No.
It's just there in a documentarian style.
Exactly.
He walks up to it. And that's what I mean about no rules. Like, I love that stuff.
Yes.
I want to see that everywhere. But of course, when we have certain DPs and American folks, they look at it and they're like, oh, you can't do that.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
But it works here. And like I said, it draws attention to itself, but not in a bad way. And I kept saying it's like intruding. There's when they're on the beach and Nira's writing the poems down, transcribing, the camera is like right there on top of her hand, like, again, like peeking in on it. And again, it's not a POV thing, and it's not like shaky, handheld stuff either. And that was the thing that amazed me, is so many of these are up close. Clearly I don't know what type of rig we're on, but this would normally be like, trying to get that feel of handheld, like we're more documentary style, but it doesn't come off that way. It's still this free motion, but there's something about it that is intentional and controlled. So it's not as jarring, but it's controlled in a, as you said, like out of the box, breaking the rules kind of way. So it's clear that there's a choice being made to do these things for a specific reason. I don't know always what they are, but it looks, beautiful. There's so many camera moves. I think there's one where, is it from like Yoav's point of view, he's like on the swing and he tilts his head back, and we're looking up at this. I mean, or Nira is, I can't remember, but there's the way the camera is placed is just, I thought, I want more movies shot this way, but I think it needs the right subject matter. And that's sort of the piece that I think ties into this, is since we're going to have a movie about poetry and creativity, and what that means.
Well, and you need support. You need people who are comfortable with that. You need an artist behind the camera and leading the camera that is thoughtful in the way that you do it, because so many times we see things that are set up, and it's art for art's sake, and you're just like, But this, it was so well done in the way that the story, the shots telling the story had purpose. And I think it's a special thing about this movie.
Okay, we've talked a lot about how this thing looks, so we should probably talk about what's actually going on in the story of the kindergarten teacher, because I think there's some interesting things that happen here. So, I mean, the basic setup is we've got our main character, Nira. She's a kindergarten teacher. She discovers that one of her students, she observes him just like reciting this poem. He starts pacing, and then he just delivers this poem. And we know that she's been taking a poetry class on her own, something that she does after work. She's in this like creative writing poetry class, and she's brought we see one of her poems and sort of so-and-so, reviews. But then she starts to borrow the poems of her student and passing them off as her own, and starts getting a little bit of praise from her poetry teacher. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. Like, how am I supposed to feel about her? Is this just flat out theft? Is she, what is her reason for doing this? Is she wants the praise, she wants to be a poet, and she isn't capable of doing it herself, so she's going to steal from the child? I mean, what was
for me, I mean, the nature of the Israeli aspect of this, the fact that it's a foreign film, had me really trusting the language, because it's possible that I don't pick up on the cultural nuances that are being revealed to us in the way that people are acting. So I tended to trust Nira in that she feels that she has found genius.
Okay.
And that she's trying to nurture it. And I think that's reinforced by two things. And we're going to start breaking into some spoiler territory here, in that she rats out the nanny for using it in the same way for auditions, which I will say I don't think is a problem, because she's not using it for her own personal gain. She's doing a monologue in an audition.
Right.
But regardless, that causes a huge problem immediately with Yoav's father.
Right.
But then when she is put in the position where she could receive acclaim, profit, publish, she immediately brings him to the mic and says that it's his.
Right.
So I tend to believe her. Now, I didn't catch that she was getting the special. I didn't feel that she was getting enriched by the special treatment. I do recognize that she did receive the special treatment, and there are some things that happen in that she gets into intimate relationships and these kind of explicit things. But that being said, I never felt like she was taking advantage of it, because I still believed throughout that her. Now we might. Again, I bring up that I think that this is partially because it's a foreign film, and I might not understand the social cues that they're putting forward there. I think when we talk about the American film, I might feel a little bit differently about it. But the part is, I felt like she really was focused on this poet and thinking that he was special, and she wanted something special for him.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where the story gets going, because at first she's passing them off as her own, and she sees this. It's
Barely.
not just
she's reading it in a class,
right? But I think what she's doing is she has a sense that these are really good poems, and I think she's getting some validation of it's not just her opinion, but that everybody else in her class sees this. So it's sort of validating.
Trust her own opinion,
right?
She may be reading it,
right,
so that these other poets, and including this poetry teacher, would see if they feel like it too. It's kind of like a test audience.
Yes, exactly. It's validating her opinion that this is really good poetry. And so then she gets into the fact of, okay, she's concerned about that we're losing poems. So she talks to Andy, like, you've got to write these down. We can't lose these, because she knows these are valuable, and it's this child that's creating these, and if we lose them, they're lost for all time. And so her first attempt to protect Yoav, she starts getting really protective about no one else understands him, that he's this valuable artist. And so she starts by approaching the man whom she feels started Yoav on his path, which is his uncle, because the nanny tells a story about the uncle used to come and read poems to him and all that. And the way that Nira describes this is she's talking with the uncle, as she says, "You're the man that opened him to the world of words." And so he was once himself a poet, but he now works for a newspaper.
באתי בשמו של האחיין שלך, יואב. למרות שהוא לא יודע שאני פה. המטפלת מירי, השחקנית. איש סיפרה לי שאתה פתחת בפני יואב את השער לעולם המילים, כמו שאומרים.
מודה באשמה.
כשאני מביטה מסביב, על הגן שלי, על ילדים בני 5, ברור לי כמה קשה להיות משורר בעולם הזה. להיות משורר בעולם שלנו, זה ללכת נגד הטבע של העולם. המפגש עם יואב הוא אושר גדול, אבל גם שליחות. כמו ששירים צצים ממנו עכשיו, יש לי שיר, ככה גם הכל יכול לדמום. ומה יהיה כשהוא יתבגר? זיפים, פצעים. אם זה היה תלוי בי, אני כבר עכשיו הייתי מנסה לעניין מוציא לאור. רציתי לפנות לאבא שלו, שייתן לי ייפוי כוח כדי לטפל בקריירה שלו, אבל הבנתי שהאבא עסוק, ובכלל, שהוא איש של אוכל, לא איש של מילים. אני אגב לא מחטטת. זאת מירי, המטפלת שסיפרה לי את כל זה. אבל מירי, אני חייבת להזהיר, היא דמות מאוד בעייתית עבור יואב. לא רק שהיא לא מבינה את גודל הכישרון, שחקנית. אני נאלצת לחשוף בפניך שמירי משתמשת ללא רשות בשירים של יואב כטקסטים במבחני הבת שלה ומציגה אותם כשירים שלה. גנבת.
And so the thing that struck me about the scene is, I mean, we get to that, you know, as you mentioned, the anger that she has about the nanny, you know, using them for her own poems and or for her auditions. You know, she calls her a thief. But it gives us, for me, coming to that cultural piece, some insight into the role of poets and poetry in this culture, because during this conversation, the uncle recites part of a poem and Nira recognizes it immediately. It's like, oh, she knows who that poet is, and it's not a name I recognize. And in America, yes, you could probably recite a Robert Frost poem and people might recognize, you know, one or two of those. But to me, I got the sense that this is a culture that's really versed in poetry. And I think it represents Nira's fear of, you know...
Well, I don't know if it's the culture. I think it's clear that the uncle and Nira are both versed in poetry.
Yes. Well, this is where I'm going to bring some of my own sort of background knowledge in terms of American culture and other cultures, and not just specifically Israel. But, I mean, in other cultures, poets sometimes are respected as like the voice of the people. And there's a poet, and I don't have my notes... I don't have it in my notes here, but there was a poet, it was somewhere in South America. There was a, you know, political uprising, and they had taken a bunch of, you know, basically some of the people that rebelled, put them in a stadium, and one of them was one of the poets, and he started leading the people in chants and poems, and they executed him. They cut off his hands and executed him because he was basically empowering the people by being this voice. And so, I mean, we don't, poets in American culture, can anybody name the poet laureate of the United States of America today? Probably.
We have one?
Yes, we do. We've had one
Really?
for many years.
That.
Exactly.
Okay.
Poetry is something that's studied in school, but it doesn't live in the culture. And so that's one of the things that I think is part of the piece here that to me gives rise to Nira's fear is this is what she's concerned will happen to Yoav at sort of a cultural point of rather than being nurtured as the artist, you know, this voice, he's going to end up like the uncle, a person that is just going to be a typical person. And she wants more for him than that because she sees the vast potential in these poems. And that's...
Yeah, he's 5, though.
Yeah. Oh, I know. But the vocabulary he uses, oh my gosh. I didn't... You know?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is the other...
The vocabulary was so unique, I guess is the right word. It was so unique that I found myself waiting for the scene where he was just actually really great with memory, and he was reciting it to someone else.
It was stuff that his uncle had read to him, and that he was just...
And that isn't what happened.
No,
I mean, which I'm glad. I'm glad that the movie turned out that way, that this kid really was special in a particular way, but it was so tough to take that leap. I wonder she would have to be an aspiring poet to believe as well, because so many people would hear that and just assume, well, where did you hear that? You know,
right? And the other piece that I think might speak to just sort of the cultural aspect of the poetry is and again, I could be completely off base, but the first poem that she hears him recite is about a woman called Hagar. Now, this is an important... I'm going to assume a lot of things here, but Hagar is one of the characters in the biblical Old Testament. She is Abraham's concubine and the mother of his son Ishmael. So there's a whole aspect of this that I think is going to tie very much into Israeli culture, history, and heritage. So
yeah.
I mean, it could just be possible that that's a popular name. I don't know. But it's something there that resonated with me.
But in this movie, they never relate it to anyone.
No.
Always just out there in the open.
Right. And the fact that the other thing that sort of reinforces this possibility for me is that there's a moment in the kindergarten class where they're acting out a historical event of whatever, some type of revolution.
Judah and the Maccabees.
Judah and the Maccabees, right. Yes, exactly. So for me, again, it seemed to be, and again, I try not to get into allegory there, but just looking at the role of poetry and language in the culture. So that's where I think possibly there's something more going on there of why poetry is sort of the mechanism there, and why Nira values it so much is because in a tradition, that goes back thousands of years, and poetry being part of that she's seeing him as something representative of that, versus I think what we'll see later on is like what her father represents, which is just wealth, and that's great, but he needs to be a successful businessman.
His father represents.
Right. It's
exactly.
like, great, he can do that now, but that's not the man I want my son to be.
Right.
Yeah.
The sort of utilitarianism that is important in today's society versus the dreamers of artists in past. But I think that's really interesting too. I hadn't considered that it would be connected in that way, but that's really interesting considering all the different imagery they gave us.
Yes.
As part of his schooling, even as a kindergartner.
Right. So then, moving the story along. So there's this. The uncle says he's going to call the father. He never does. She talks with the father. Ends up getting the maid fired because which I thought was an interesting. It's the one piece I struggled with story-wise. It seemed a little bit too convenient because the father, who doesn't seem to care much about poetry, can't abide a thief in his house, so fires the maid who is, stealing his son's poetry to use for her auditions. Which it was. Then
the dialogue that they used there was tough too. It was awfully quick.
Yes.
And to call it stealing when you put no value in the product at all, seemed like a leap.
It's that piece, because basically that gets the nanny out of the way in terms of the story, so that then that puts Nira in a position to basically be the caretaker of Yoav. Because the father says, well, can you watch him for a couple of days till I can find somebody else? So that gives her access to him that allows the next piece to happen, which is she's going to take him to a poetry reading. Because if there was a nanny there's no reason for her to have him out late at night at a poetry reading. But clearly, if she's the one that the father has designated to be responsible, because mom's out of the picture, there's been the horrible divorce, mom's, someplace else, he's busy running his restaurant, so he's not going to know. That gives Nira access to take him to a poetry reading. So what's interesting about this is that she gets this opportunity because, again, it's her poetry teacher who thinks these poems are hers. So they have a little meeting, which starts off as sort of like, it's hard to read what this, it's flirtation, I guess. And then he's, I think, trying to compliment her of like, oh, your poems, I've got this poetry reading, there's going to be poets there, you'll be able to read your poems and all of these things. And it's something that just, he invites her to this reading, and it's a little bit strange to me.
את משוררת, נירה. באמצע שבוע הבא יתקיים ערב משוררים צעירים. שם כל האורחים והמשוררים שבדרך כלל לא יכולים לסבול איש פרט לעצמם. אני מכיר את אחת המארגנות. הצעתי לה שתקריא שיר או שניים.
וואו. זה מאוד נדיב מצדך.
בסוף הערב נלך לאלברט. שמעת על המקום? המשוררים והאורחים יושבים שם, בקהל, שותים, מדברים, אם המוזיקה לא חזקה מדי. את תהיי מושא קנאה.
Because at the end, she starts pacing just like Yoav does and recites this poem, which, he doesn't understand what's going on. For her, it's like she's trying to channel him, but then he tries to turn it into what is probably, I think, the most awkward seduction ever. And perhaps realistic of a man hurriedly trying to get his pants off and struggling with his shoes.
I think there's a cultural thing there too.
Yes.
Most of the sexual stuff in this movie, I think, is going to seem unusual to Americans because of the way that it's approached. But And honestly, the teacher for the most part is a non-character in
Yes.
the Israeli version of this movie. But you're right. All he's doing is seducing her.
Right.
I mean, there's no other thing for him, and she's in a completely different position with it. And he knows nothing of Yoav at this point. So it's a weird thing, and this gets into the sort of character piece that you were talking about before. When we consider Nira as a character, what is she doing here? How is she approaching this situation? Because this runs contrary to what I said before in this idea that I just trust her and I just believe that she's going after this genius. She's also a person in tumult. She's trying to figure out her place in the world, and she's not doing a very good job of it.
No, she's not. So she takes the invitation to the poetry reading as this opportunity to like showcase Yoav. She picks 2 poems. She has him practice them so that when they can get there, she even gives him some like Q&A prep. Like they might ask you some questions like this. So she's prepping him for like his like debut on the stage as a poet. And it does not go at all the way she expects. It did not go at all the way I expected either, because I wasn't quite sure. And again, this is where there's a cultural piece, because one of the poems that she picks is this one about the bullfighter. And again, there's, as we saw in the like poetry workshop, there was one woman who was just adamantly opposed, like, those are for, those don't happen anymore. Why would you even talk about this inhumane killing animals, all this? And it seems like something similar happens to the poetry reading, because it's such a strange event, because he's reading it. And then the woman that was on stage before said, well, you say it, and then she's going to repeat it louder to the crowd, because she's one of these more like contemporary, like performance poet people. Right. And then everybody starts like, just throwing candy on stage. Yeah, and then
which is very confusing.
Which is and then he gets distracted, because it's like, I'm a 5-year-old kid. People are throwing candy at me. I'm going to scoop up all this candy, and that sort of like derails everything. And I'm not sure how to take that, because I don't know if it's a rejection of his poetry, if it's just they see him as a child, and I'm trying to reconcile what that means for Nira and her appreciation that. Does no one else get it the way she does? Or is it...
Well, and I think it's explained in the next scene when they go to the dance, when she kind of gives up and then goes to the after dance, and the first woman talks to him and says, and recognized the same genius that she did.
Right.
And then the candy thrower, that woman says that the candy thrower owes her an apology.
Right.
And then he immediately disregards it, and they just go dance.
Right.
Like the point is, I think... The point of that is that there are people who are looking for genius and who see it, and then there are others who are just out there to make a mess. And I think, I don't know, it explained it to me, because I was really confused when it was happening with the reading, but it at least put it in context for me when then we saw this sort of breakdown at the dance bar.
Right.
Afterwards.
And then we get a really long extended dance sequence, which is
awkward, but purposefully awkward.
Yes,
again.
Yes,
yeah.
I think so. But then that takes us to sort of like the final movement of the film, which is because she took him to this poetry reading, the father finds out, basically withdraws him from the kindergarten, so Nira has no access to him. So then this is where she goes really, off the edge of following them to school, waiting, luring Yoav out, telling him, okay, this is how to open he's out on the school playground, which is all gated and fenced. And she's like, okay, lift that thing over and slide that over so the door can open. Yep. She takes him, and they hit the road. And she's going to flee the country, because she's calling to see if she can get a passport. She's saying, I'm his aunt, and, can I do this? No, we need the parents' permission. How old is he? Oh, he's 5. No, you need to have the parents. We can't issue a passport or replacement passport. So we know she was going to flee the country.
She's all in at this point.
Right. She's all in. So they end up at some type of like hotel. She gives a fake name, and then it's like this on the edge of my seat, because this room has like the most ridiculously large window I've ever seen in a hotel room. And the fact that it just like opens. It's not, it like pivots on a vertical axis. So it just like swings open into the room, and it's this huge square of like out into outside. And I'm thinking, somebody's going out the window. Somebody's going out the window. Oh my gosh, somebody is going out the window.
I totally thought that, and I'm so glad no one did.
Because
here's the most important spoiler that anyone's going to hear on this entire show. Nobody jumps out the window.
Or falls out the window, because he takes a...
Yeah.
They've been down to the beach. We talked, briefly alluded to that scene, and there's poetry there, and she's reading him poetry, all that. They're back in the room. He takes a shower. He's sitting on the bed. Then she goes to take a shower, which she's leaving a 5-year-old unattended with this huge window. And then he pulls a chair up to it. I thought,
that's why I think that's just an American thing. I think it has to be, because there's no way. I mean, if they do that in an American movie, everyone's assuming that there's a suicide,
that there's some tragedy that he's going to fall out the window and.
Right, and I mean, it was powerful enough without that thought. So,
right, it was. But then we get this is where things get, and this is where I think the questions about is this an allegory or not happen, because they're on the run. Where are they going to go from here? That's when he picks up the phone and she basically guides him through. He's locked her in the bathroom, and then. She hears him trying to make a phone call. So she basically guides him through the process of making a 911 call to the police so that they can come and get him. And I'm trying to track what's going on with her. What realization has she come to that nothing more can happen? She's got to basically surrender and give herself up. That's what's best for him.
It's confusing.
Yeah, it's not clear
but
all.
I think the part when I look back on it, when she asks him very plainly, "Did you lock the door?" and he says yes. And she says, "Did you do it on purpose?" and he says yes. It's like that simple, those simple things, because they don't really have throughout their dialogue throughout the film. It's not really straightforward. It's all in poetry land. Right. I mean, it's all perspectives and look at the world like a cat and all these kind of it's all artistry. So this is like a moment of clarity when she says, "Oh wait," and she realized, I think, in that moment too, that this is just fantasy land. Yeah, and let's get back to real life.
Yes. And so to me, what was most jarring about this is, sure, okay, he then lets her out because she wants to get dressed. She's like, let me get dressed before they get here. So she can be dressed.
Which is very sweet.
Yes. So he does. The police come in. They scoop him up. And then as we leave the room, which has been a really quiet place. I mean, even on the beach, it was, there was beach sounds and all of that and the ocean, and there were people around. But once the policewoman scoops him up and walks him out, it's there's dance music and they're walking past the pool and it's hey, everybody in the pool, we're gonna have a dance party. And it just seemed I don't want to say Vegas, but it just was a completely different feel outside of the room. And I'm it's this is where I started to lean into a little bit more of the quiet solitude of the world of poetry that they were in versus the rest of the world, which is loud, bombastic, partying, all of that.
Wow.
And then the policewoman, makes her way through and sits him down on a stool there, so in the hotel lobby or whatever. And that's our last shot of just him sitting there, and he's immersed in, as I said, the world separate from poetry. And that's where we end.
Cacophony of real life. I hadn't thought about it that way. That is a really interesting way to look at that last sequence. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's the only thing, because it just leaves a shot on him, and I'm so we're supposed to be, in my opinion, by placing the camera and just holding that shot on him. For me, we're supposed to be reflecting on what's going on with him. Where is he? What is he feeling? And the music is just...
What happened to this kid?
Yeah.
What's going on in his head?
Yeah. Because we've seen that side of him, because there's that... I don't want to say horrible, but as a parent, horrific scene of him and his buddy, whose dad is a soccer player or something, doing their little chant, cursing the other team with really crude, foul language.
Calling them Nazis and whores.
Yes, exactly. So we've seen his exposure to that. It's not oh, I'm a poet, I'm separate from the world. It's no, he's still a kid that enjoys that stuff. And Nero was trying to protect him from that, and now he's removed from her and fully placed in that. And is it the statement that, her worst fears are going to come true. Now he's going to be a child of the world. He's going to be, he's not going to be the poet.
I don't have a desire to go back and watch this movie, even though I liked it so much, but that would be really interesting if you take that simple metaphor and run through the entire film and see if that's the space, because they spend so much time when they're in kindergarten.
Yes.
Her waking him up from naps.
Yes. Yeah.
To see the world in this quiet space.
Yeah.
I just think I really like your take on that. I think that would be really interesting to look at the movie in that way.
Well, this is one that I really connected with because I've got a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing with a concentration in poetry. So I've lived in poetry land.
Perfect.
And so many of the things there I just love about this film. It's assembled very poetically. Its focus on, poetic language of different ways of looking at the world is one that that's why I ranked it so high, is it just really, as I was watching this movie just basically said, I am for you. This, you are going to get this. and I did. And it's something that I can't explain, but I've been in those poetry workshops where you've got the people that are just going to argue with everything and, all of that. I'm like, I don't miss that at all, but that's so dead on for all of these things. And then just being around people that live poetry deeply, just as Nira aspires to. I know those type of people and their outlook on the world is very different. So I could connect with a lot of these things, and just the visuals of everything just really made this unique film that I'll probably watch again, several more times, over the next couple of years, because it just really, because I feel like it's a puzzle to be solved. And I don't know if I'll ever solve it, but I enjoy going down it and engaging with it on that level. So for me,
it's a beautiful piece of art. It's really great.
Well, our next rewind is going to be the U.S. remake from 2018 starring Maggie Gyllenhaal, which is available right now on Netflix. Thank you for listening to Trailer Rewind. If anything we said here entertained, educated, or even enraged you, we'd like you to tell people about this podcast. Whatever your listening platform is, please share, rate, or write a short review. It helps other podcast listeners find us. If you enjoy connecting with other film fans, you can become a member of our community on Discord. It's free, and there's always an interesting dialogue or debate to jump into. You can also financially support us on Patreon. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive Discord channels, the opportunity to chat with us live before we record an episode, and the warm feeling you get knowing you are contributing support to the behind-the-scenes resources that help everyone here at the Next Reel family of podcasts. So please join us on Discord or become a Patreon supporter. Either way, we would love to have you be part of our community. Hondo.